only 2 Democrats in the House voted with Republicans. Not a single Democrat in the Senate voted with Republicans. So essentially almost every Democrat in Congress today says biological males should be able to play sports against women. Is this much ado about nothing, or evidence that Democrats have learned nothing from the election?
It's interesting. I'm surprised. I was surprised by that outcome, that every Democrat in the Senate all stuck together on this, because I think this is a complicated issue. And I don't see it as left, right, and I don't think that you can split straight down party lines. It's complicated. In other words, I think that compassion for transgender people, it should be universal. I think that, having transgender rights and all of that stuff, you can argue. But I think that the sports thing is in a more complicated bucket than just transgender rights. I don't lump it all together. I think that sports is complicated. And so I was surprised the Democrats just voted up and down party lines.
I was stunned.
Because there's a way to be compassionate and there's a way to want to figure this out, but also understand that biologically a transgender woman is different than a woman who was female at birth.
Right. Would you want someone who was born a man competing in sports with your 2 daughters?
I really wouldn't.
I wouldn't either.
I really wouldn't.
I don't actually think it's that difficult of an issue. I think it's pretty clear, and we've seen evidence. Yes, there are very few cases, but when you look at Leah Thomas, the collegiate swimmer, it wasn't close. She was thoroughly dominating the greatest swimmers in the country, and I'm sure there's some talent there, but she was physically a man.
Right.
And the other reason I'm stunned that Democrats stuck together in an issue that didn't go their way in the election is the New York Times recently did a poll on this. 79% of Americans said they don't believe biological males should be able to play sports with females. That goes across both parties.
That's my point.
67% of Democrats agreed with that. 94% of Republicans. They are on the wrong side of the country and of history, and it baffles me.
Well, here's their explanation. The way they explain it is not that they think that, there's no biological difference. They think it shouldn't be mandated at the federal level. They think that it should be at the state level, or even at the local school district level, where people know the different athletes. So that's the argument they're making. I don't know if that's real. I don't know if to take them at face value, if that's really what they're doing, or if this is such a cultural wedge issue that they all stuck together on it. But you could make that argument that, why is it Donald Trump is the person who's kicking everything back to the states. Why does this have to be a federal issue?
Well, President Biden botched this himself in essentially telling the NCAA what to do. And then President Trump came in and said, look, I don't agree with President Trump on everything, but he came in and said, this absolutely makes no sense. Here's what we're telling you, NCAA. No, biological males cannot compete against females. I talked to the NCAA president, Charlie Baker, exclusively about this, asked him, is he happy with the guidance moving forward? Here's what he told me.
And we made pretty clear to our colleagues at the federal level that the lack of a national standard here was a big problem. You had a bunch of states where it was at the state level, transgender athletes could not participate in women's sports. And yet at the same time, you had decision after decision being issued by federal judges in favor of participation. I testified in front of Congress and made clear to Congress. I was there for a sports betting hearing, but this issue came up, and I made clear to those folks that having a single national standard on this issue would be very helpful to us. We're talking about an incredibly small number of student athletes to begin with. There are 510,000 student athletes. There are less than 10 that we know of who are transgender athletes participating in college sports.
That's interesting. That's interesting. When you look at the numbers for how big of an issue transgender became,
issue, front page issue.
Absolutely. And I do think that it played into the election in a big way. And then you look at the actual numbers of people who are affected, it's totally disproportionate.
I was floored to hear that only 10.
Less than 10, he said.
I mean, of more than 500,000. Then there's the question that I asked Charlie, well, what about those records that Leah Thomas took? Again, like if that was your daughter who was getting crushed by Leah Thomas in swim meets and deserved golds, might have deserved records, should they erase those records from NCAA history? Here's what President Baker told me. A lot of this started because of Leah Thomas, the swimmer who was dominating female swimming, a transgender racer. Should her records be erased?
I think the issue with my answer to that one is we normally don't go back and rewrite records and rules. We just don't. I mean, this issue's come up a lot over the course of the last, call it 100 years, where people have wanted, based on rule changes, to go back and change all kinds of rules. Historically, that's not been something that the professional ranks or the collegiate ranks have done.
Disagree there. I do think it's pretty clear they should wipe away those records.
I disagree.
Those were not fair.
I disagree.
Those were not earned.
I disagree because so you know so much more about this, obviously, in sports than I do. But when I listen to him, he's saying, we're all kind of products of our time. You don't do that.
But
You don't rewind.
Like
you don't go
steroids
back.
in baseball. That's not like a man swimming against women.
Well, if you're steroids in baseball, you should definitely lose the record. I mean, if you're doping, that's even a worse.
My point is
experience.
Everyone was doping in those times. I just think if my daughter was a swimmer, she deserved to have the first place in those races in which she lost to Leah Thomas, who should not have been there by the rules today. I do understand his point. Charlie Baker, by the way, left Massachusetts as a governor of a blue
Republican
state,
governor, yeah.
80% approval rating.
Massachusetts has that crazy paradox where they often have Republican between William Weld, a Republican, and there's many more. They like Republican governors there.
Arguably the bluest of blue states, and he was the most popular governor in the country. We want to add one more note on the transgender issue. The likely candidate in 2028 for the Democrats, and probably the most high profile at the moment, California Governor Gavin Newsom, who is very progressive, just came out today and said, no, I am not siding with Democrats on this. I do think it's highly unfair that biological males compete against females. He sides with Republicans here, and I think what he's doing is positioning himself as a different kind of Democrat as we move forward in 2028. He started a podcast where he hopes to engage voices from the other side of the aisle. I don't think he ends up the candidate, but I think that's a very smart move for Newsom.
But I also think that, to my point, that the sports thing is more complicated. It doesn't mean that you're anti-trans. It doesn't mean that you're mean-spirited. It's just complicated for sports.
Sure, but 80% of Americans don't agree that the sky is blue or that the planet is, that ice cream is good or the grass is green. We don't agree on anything.
What idiot doesn't think ice cream is good? Show me that idiot.
I'm going with 80% if
You're
I'm
right.
in
Fair.
Congress.
Okay, now, should we segue to our Monopoly?
Do you want to stop? Yeah, okay.
Okay. And, you can cut, because Dave